So, you're wanting to get into the Xenoblade Chronicles series, but you don't know where to start and you don't know what order to play them in. Well, by the end of this video, you'll be able to answer both of those questions. I should first mention that Xenoblade Chronicles X is not on this list because it's a spin-off game, and the story in this game is not connected to Xenoblade Chronicles 1 or Xenoblade Chronicles 2. With that out of the way, let me explain the games that are going to be included in this list. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch is a remaster of the first game in the Xenoblade series, and it's the definitive way to play the first game. Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected is the sequel to Xenoblade 1 that is included as extra story to the definitive edition of the game. It's more of an epilogue to the first Xenoblade Chronicles game, as both take place in the world of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the second full game in the series, but Torna the Golden Country, instead of being a sequel to Xenoblade 2, is actually a prequel to this game. Much like Future Connected is to Xenoblade 1, Torna is meant to be a supplement to Xenoblade 2, and together they form a cohesive story. How do the worlds of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 connect? You'll just have to play the games to find out. And you'll find out even more in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, as this game is going to be a continuation of both of the worlds of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. Speaking of, let's get to the first game that you should play. Right off the bat, we have a dilemma. While it may seem obvious to start with Xenoblade Chronicles 1 to jump into the franchise with, you definitely don't have to. Because the stories of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 take place in separate worlds, you can technically play either first. But that doesn't mean you should. I would highly recommend playing Xenoblade 1 before Xenoblade 2, because what happens at the end of the first game will be a lot less impactful if you play the second game first. How do I know this? Because I played the second game first. Am I proud of it? Not really. While I admit it's hard to experience the magic of the ending of a mainline Xenoblade game twice, you'll definitely have a better shot at experiencing that magic twice if you play Xenoblade 2 after Xenoblade 1. Makes your head spin, huh? Well, you can get used to that if you're wanting to get into the Xenoblade Chronicles series. So we got Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition first, but then what? Well, you're going to want to play the Future Connected story or extra story next. This is where I really have no wiggle room in terms of the order of gameplay. You really need to play the Future Connected story only after you've beaten the main game, as it has massive spoilers for the end of the main Xenoblade Chronicles 1 game. Unless, of course, you just want to ruin the end of Xenoblade 1 for yourself. Yeah, don't do that. And as with many other things in the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise, things only get trickier from here. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torna the Golden Country has the name Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in it for a reason. As mentioned earlier, like Future Connected is to Xenoblade Chronicles 1, Torna is basically an extension of the second game, except it's a prequel rather than a sequel. Of course, this means it comes before the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Well then, problem solved, right? Of course not. While you definitely can play Torna before the main story of Xenoblade 2, you might not want to. Because this game was made after Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the creators of the game knew the core audience would play this game second. Well, duh. And therefore, the story is told in a way that is aware that the audience knows what happens in the main game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. There are many things that the audience simply won't pick up on or won't understand if they haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles 2. However, the same could be said about playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 before Torna. With that said though, the audience certainly won't understand what happened before the events of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, as it's only hinted at in the main story. You see, it's really a give or take with these two games. You can tell that while the story writers of Torna wanted people who played Xenoblade 2 already to get the most out of the story, they also wrote the story in Torna in a way that won't spoil too much of the main story. Which game will have more of an impact on you is really up to the order that you play them in. Some people have even mentioned that playing Torna in between certain chapters of Xenoblade 2 is the best way to play, since everything you play in Torna will not only make sense, but it will also allow that prequel story to play out before you complete the main story of Xenoblade 2. And while that might even be my recommended route, I don't think that's a feasible way to play these games, since Xenoblade 2 is already long enough. You might end up putting one of these games down because you don't have enough drive to finish them. And let me tell you, being able to actually finish Xenoblade 2 definitely solidified my commitment to sticking with the franchise. I think that at least watching the cutscenes from Torna in between chapters from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a good route to go after you've played all the games. With that said, taking both gameplay and story into account, I would personally recommend playing Torna after Xenoblade 2. Why? Because there are some elements of mystery and curiosity that simply won't be present in the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 if you've already played Torna. Many of the questions you have and many of the questions you didn't know you had about the past of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 will be answered in Torna in a most satisfactory way. Lastly, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which is unreleased as of this recording, and therefore it is more difficult to come to a definite conclusion. However, I'm pretty confident this game will need to be played last. As mentioned earlier, this game is going to be a continuation of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2, as well as their two supplemental games, which is a pretty good indicator of this game needing to be played last. So to recap what order I think you should play the Xenoblade Chronicles games in, first we have Xenoblade Chronicles the Definitive Edition, then Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected, then Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torn of the Golden Country, and lastly, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. With that said, you definitely don't have to play these games in this order. I know this because I played them in the order of Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade 1, Future Connected, and then Torn of the Golden Country, and I still had a blast. Well, at least once I got far enough into Xenoblade 2. I actually almost completely gave up on the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise because of how long it took me to get into Xenoblade 2. But the payoff was well worth it. If you want to hear that story, then check out this video next.